Leave me! What do you want to know from me?
Private gymnasium on the east side of Burbank, California. A converted warehouse with 40-foot ceilings, 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling mirrors, and rubber flooring that still carried the smell of the previous tenant. A wholesale tire distributor who had vacated the space 6 months before. The lighting came from industrial fluorescents that buzzed at a frequency just low enough to be felt rather than heard. There were 11 people in the room. 11 witnesses. Not 3,000. Not a stadium. 11. Which in certain circumstances is enough. Steven Seagal was 36 years old that afternoon. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 231 pounds. He had earned a 7th degree black belt in Aikido, a rank so rare that fewer than 40 Americans had ever held it. He had trained in Japan for 11 years, opened one of the few Aikido dojos in Osaka ever granted to a non-Japanese national, and returned to the United States carrying credentials that most martial artists would spend a lifetime unable to approach. He had also, in the preceding 18 months, made himself into something else entirely, a movie star. Above the Law had opened that spring to numbers that surprised everyone who did not know him and no one who did. He was, by any reasonable accounting, the most credentialed and the most famous martial artist working in Hollywood at that moment. His reputation in the room was not a rumor. It had been earned, in dojos over a decade, in a country that did not offer such ranks carelessly. What happened in the next 44 seconds would not be reported in any newspaper. It would not appear in any press release. It would travel instead the way these things always travel, mouth to ear, dojo to dojo, over years, gaining and shedding details the way a river carries and deposits stone. But 11 people were present, and the story they told, separately, across 3 decades did not contradict itself in any of the ways that matter. If you have ever wondered what Socrates meant when he said that the most dangerous form of ignorance is the kind that does not know itself, stay with this until the end. The answer walked into that gymnasium on a Tuesday afternoon in November, wearing a black gi and certainty enough to fill the room twice over. Chuck Norris had arrived 20 minutes early, as was his habit. He was 48 years old. He wore a gray t-shirt, dark trousers and running shoes that had not been purchased for the occasion. He carried no bag. He had driven himself from his ranch in Northridge alone, and he had parked, by several accounts, at the far end of the lot, which no one thought anything of at the time. He was not anonymous in the way a stranger is anonymous. He was the kind of man who simply did not fill a room until the moment he chose to. He sat in a folding chair along the east wall, and watched the session that preceded his arrival without speaking to anyone in it. The session was Seagal's. 40 minutes of demonstration and instruction, 11 students arranged in a semicircle, Seagal at the center. And Seagal was, by every account of those present, genuinely extraordinary in that room. His Aikido was not the performative version that films would later compress into montage. It was technical, geometric, ruthlessly precise. He moved the way a man moves who has spent 11 years being corrected by teachers who did not speak his language and therefore corrected him with their hands. His uke, his practice partner, a brown belt named Randall Cook, who stood 6'1" and had trained for 7 years, could not get his footing back once Seagal had touched his wrist. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when a skill is real and everyone present knows it. Norris watched without expression. He had been watching men move for 30 years. He had built his own career on the kind of accuracy that only comes from watching. He noticed the hip positioning. He noticed the angle of entry on each throw. He noticed in particular the moment at which each technique resolved, the precise instant when control transferred completely from the attacker to the defender. He said nothing. He held his coffee cup in both hands and watched. Seagal became aware of him at the 17-minute mark according to Cook's recollection. Not immediately. Not obviously. But a change moved through the room, the kind of atmospheric shift that happens when an audience of 11 becomes an audience of 12 and the 12th has weight. Seagal did not acknowledge it directly. He continued. He completed the demonstration. Then he turned toward the east wall where Norris sat and he did something that none of the 11 people in that room had anticipated. He invited the audience. He did not ask. He announced, The distinction matters. I want to show these students, Seagal said, speaking to the room rather than to Norris directly, what happens when Aikido meets a striking art. I want them to see how this works against a puncher. He said it the way a professor delivers a thesis he has already defended. He said it the way a man says something when he is certain of the answer before the question has been asked. Randall Cook would later say that he held his breath for approximately 4 seconds after those words landed. The other 10 people in the room held the same breath, for different reasons. Chuck Norris set his coffee cup on the floor beside the folding chair. He set it down with care. Then he stood. He had not come to fight. That is the thing that must be stated plainly before anything else. He had come because a mutual acquaintance, a film producer named Gerald Orenstein who had worked with both men, had suggested a meeting, a conversation, a professional courtesy between two men who occupied adjacent rooms in the same industry. He had not brought his gi. He had not loosened his shoes. He stood in the clothes he had driven in from Northridge, and he looked at Steven Seagal for a moment. That Cook estimated at 3 seconds, and another witness, a stunt coordinator named Marcus Webb, estimated at 6. He removed his jacket. It was a gray windbreaker, the kind with a zipper that runs from the hem to the collar. He folded it once along the midline and set it across the back of the folding chair. He did not roll his neck. He did not bounce on his heels. He did not do any of the things a man does when he is preparing a performance. He walked to the edge of the mat. The recognition moved through the 11 people in the room differently than it moves through 3,000. It did not travel row by row. It was not a wave. It was a single, simultaneous arrival, the way a temperature changes in a room when a window is opened. Marcus Webb later said that he had recognized Norris the moment he walked through the door at the beginning of the session, and had said nothing, waiting. The way you wait when you are watching something assemble itself and do not want to interrupt the assembly. Randall Cook said he had known since the coffee cup. One of the junior students, a 22-year-old named Peter Ahn who had been training for 8 months, said he did not know who Chuck Norris was until Webb leaned over and said his name at the moment Norris set the jacket on the chair. Ahn said the name landed on him the way names land when you are 22, and you have just understood what you are in the room to witness. Seagal had already lost. He simply had not been informed yet. If you understand why that is true, you already understand what this story is about. If you do not, stay with it. The understanding is coming. And it will arrive in exactly the manner the next 44 seconds arrived, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of something that was already in the room before anyone spoke. If this is the kind of history that earns a place in your evening, make sure you are watching from a channel that will bring you more of it. Subscribe now and leave a comment below telling us what country you are watching from. We read every one. There is a principle in the study of distance that is older than sport and older than war. It has been articulated by different traditions in different languages, but its content is invariant. The man who controls the space between two bodies controls everything that happens within it. A fight is not two men striking each other. A fight is a negotiation about geometry. The man who sets the terms of that geometry, who determines how close is close, who chooses the angle of engagement before the first commitment has been made, has already won the argument, before a word has been spoken. Every technique, every combination, every throw exists inside the frame of that prior negotiation, and the outcome of every contest is determined not in the exchange but in the 2 seconds before it, when both men are deciding what the space between them means. Seagal was an Aikido practitioner of the highest rank. His art is built on the geometry of contact, on receiving an attack and redirecting it through the attacker's own structure. But receiving requires proximity. And proximity is a gift that must be given. It cannot be taken. The man who chooses the distance between two bodies decides whether that gift is ever offered. Norris had spent 30 years deciding. The 11 people in the room arranged themselves without instruction along the north and east walls, leaving the matted center open. This happened in under 10 seconds. No one directed it. No one asked. The space organized itself around what it understood was about to occur. Seagal stood at the center. Norris stood 6 feet from the near edge of the mat. He had not stepped onto it yet. The soles of his running shoes were still on the rubber floor beyond the mat's border. He stood with his hands at his sides. Second 1. Seagal moved first. This is confirmed by every witness. He moved with his right foot leading. A lateral entry step that was technically precise, the kind of approach that collapses distance while presenting the narrowest possible target profile. He covered 42 inches in that first step. His hands rose as the step landed, left extended, right chambered at his hip, in the entry position that Aikido calls irimi, a direct entering movement that commits to the attacker's space before the attacker's technique has resolved. Norris moved backward, not retreating. Resetting, the distinction is the entire lesson. He covered 21 inches going backward, half the distance Seagal had covered going forward, and he did it without shifting his weight in a way that produced any visible change in his center of gravity. From the outside watching, it appeared that he had simply declined the distance Seagal was offering. He had left Seagal's hands arriving at a point in space where a target had been and was no longer. Marcus Webb, standing against the north wall with his arms at his sides, did not move. He said later that he understood what he was watching at the end of that first second. He said it was like watching a man reach for a door handle and realize the door had already been opened from the other side. Second 2, Seagal adjusted. He came forward again, this time on the left foot, closing the angle and shortening the extension of the right hand to compensate for the repositioning. He was reading. He was skilled enough to read quickly, and what he read was that the previous entry point was unavailable. He sought a new one. This attempt covered 31 inches of ground. He generated it from his left hip. It was accurate and committed. Norris moved left 3 inches. The adjustment was so small that Peter On, standing at the far end of the east wall, missed it entirely and did not understand what had happened until Cook explained it to him afterward. The entry angle that Seagal had committed to passed through empty space. Seagal's right arm extended into nothing. His weight, committed to a target, arrived without one. The tournament director, a man named Howard Klein, who had been officiating martial arts competitions in the San Fernando Valley for 19 years, set both hands flat on the folding table he was standing behind. He did this without deciding to. He did it the way the body responds to information before the mind has finished processing it. Second 3. Seagal understood. Not fully. Not yet. But the lower register of his understanding had received the information that the first 2 attempts had transmitted, and it had begun composing a response. He changed his geometry entirely. He dropped lower, shifting his center of mass, and came forward on a diagonal with both hands leading. A less committed entry, a probe rather than a commitment, designed to invite a response that Aikido could then redirect. This is technically sophisticated. This is what a 7th degree black belt produces when the first 2 tools have failed. He moved 12 inches. He offered his right wrist as a false commitment, the way a chess player offers a pawn to open a file. Norris did not take it. He circled left, 2 steps, clean and unhurried, and arrived at a position that was 43 degrees off Seagal's new center line. Seagal's probe was now aimed at a wall. Randall Cook had been training martial arts for 7 years. He had seen a great many things in those 7 years. He said later that what he witnessed in that 3rd second produced in him a sensation he struggled to name. Not awe exactly, and not fear, but something in the register between them. He said it was the sensation of watching the ground change shape under someone else's feet. Second 4 through second 11 occupied a different kind of time than the first 3. This is not a figure of speech. The 11 people along the walls had stopped breathing in the normal way. Howard Klein had not moved his hands from the table. The fluorescence continued to buzz. Outside, on the boulevard 300 yards east, traffic moved at the pace traffic moves on a Tuesday afternoon in November in Burbank, California, indifferent to what was happening inside the building. Seagal attempted twice more. Both attempts were genuine. Both were executed at a level that would have resolved against a large majority of opponents. The 4th attempt was a rapid 2-hand entry designed to take the near sleeve and lapel simultaneously, a classically trained grab that opens into a throw in under a second if the contact is made. The contact was not made. Norris's left hand found Seagal's right wrist at the moment of extension, not to block it and not to redirect it, but simply to be there, to be occupying the space that the grab required. And then, he was not there anymore. He had moved inside, not past the grab. inside it, to the position where the grab originates, where it is nothing yet, where it is only intention. Seagal's fifth attempt was his most committed. He came forward with his full weight and his full speed and his full 36 years and 7 degrees of earned knowledge. He came with everything he had. Norris absorbed the forward pressure without accepting the geometry it required. He turned, a movement so small it was described by different witnesses as a step and a pivot and a shift. And Seagal's forward commitment met an angle it could not use. The moment in which a technique fails completely is not violent. It does not announce itself, it simply arrives. The way a key fails in the wrong lock, without drama, without impact, with only the quiet fact of the wrong fit. Seagal's weight came forward and found nothing that could be thrown. He was standing where he had intended to throw from. He had not been struck. He had not been taken down. He had simply not landed anywhere useful. Norris was standing 11 inches behind him and to his left. The room was entirely quiet. Norris did not speak immediately. He took one step back. He waited 4 seconds. Webb counted them. Later, reconstructing the moment from memory in a conversation that took place 6 years after the afternoon itself. 4 seconds is a long time in a room that quiet. Then he raised his right hand, not quickly, not dramatically, to a position just below Seagal's left ear. He held it there. He did not make contact. He held it at a distance that every trained person in the room knew was a distance of 1 inch. He held it for 2 seconds. Then he lowered his hand. Then he extended it, open, palm up, at the height of Seagal's sternum. The room remained quiet. Seagal looked at the open hand. He looked at it for a moment that Howard Klein estimated at 3 seconds, and Randall Cook estimated at 5. Then he looked at Norris directly, and Norris said something. He said it at a volume that was not intended to carry across the room. Several witnesses could not hear the words. 2 witnesses heard them clearly. What Chuck Norris said, in the gymnasium in Burbank on that Tuesday afternoon in November 1988, was this: "The art is real. Let the art be enough." 7 words. He said them without raising his voice. He said them without satisfaction. He said them the way a man states a fact he has held for a long time and now, in the appropriate moment, sets down. Seagal stood at the fork. It is the moment that every man who has ever been decisively corrected understands from the inside. The road divides. On one side is the sentence that begins, "I was wrong, and I understand what that means." On the other is the sentence that begins, "This was not a real test, and the conditions were." Both sentences are available. Both are frequently chosen. The choice is character. The choice is everything. Seagal took the hand. He shook it once. He did not speak. He turned and walked to the edge of the mat, and stepped off it onto the rubber floor beyond. He picked up his towel from the folding table where Howard Klein was standing. He said something to Klein in a voice too low to carry. He left the gymnasium. Norris went back to his folding chair. He picked up his coffee cup from the floor where he had set it. He finished the coffee. He retrieved his windbreaker from the back of the chair, put it on and sipped it from the hem to the collar. Marcus Webb moved across the room and set his hand briefly on Norris's shoulder as he was standing. Webb was 6'2", 220 pounds, had coordinated stunts on 47 feature films, and had seen a great many things. He said later that the touch was involuntary, that his hand moved before he had decided to move it, that he simply needed to confirm that what he had been watching was a real man, and not a principal wearing a gray t-shirt. The hand confirmed it. Norris nodded without looking up. He left alone. He had parked at the far end of the lot, and he walked there without hurrying. And then he drove back to Northridge. The story moved the way these stories move. It left the gymnasium in the mouths of 11 people, and it traveled through the network of bodies that the martial arts world is, through dojos in Reseda and Van Nuys and Sherman Oaks, through the stunt community and the competition circuit, and the film industry's peripheral geography of trainers and coordinators and technical advisors. It arrived in some places quickly, and in others slowly. It picked up details it had not left with, and shed details it had carried. By the time it had traveled 5 years, Some versions had the encounter lasting seconds and others had it lasting minutes. Some versions had words that were never spoken. Some versions had a crowd of 100 in the gymnasium when there had been 11. But the center of the story never changed. In every version, across 37 years, the geometry was the same. A man of extraordinary credential and genuine ability had been shown quietly that the belief he carried about himself was too large for its container. And the man who showed him had driven himself home to Northridge and said nothing about it to anyone. Howard Klein told the story in full for the first time in 2014 in a conversation with a documentary filmmaker who was working on a project about the evolution of American martial arts cinema. He had not told it before, he said, because it was not his story to tell, because the man who had the right to tell it had chosen silence, and silence has its own dignity that ought to be respected. He told it then because the filmmaker had asked directly, and because enough time had passed that the truth could settle without doing damage to anyone living in the present. Randall Cook told his version of it to his own students over many years, not as a story about Seagal and not as a story about Norris, but as a story about what the third second of a fight reveals about the decade of training that preceded it. He used it as a teaching. He said that what he had witnessed in that gymnasium was not a defeat. It was a demonstration of what happens when a man's idea of himself and the actual content of himself have been allowed to diverge, and then, without ceremony, are reunited. Marcus Webb did not tell it publicly until 2019 in an interview for a martial arts magazine that published it online. He said that the moment he found most significant was not any of the 44 seconds. It was the 4 seconds of silence before the 7 words. The 4 seconds in which Norris held the result of what had just happened without converting it into a lesson, without announcing it, without doing anything with it at all except letting it be exactly what it was. Webb said, "That's where the real art was, not in the 44 seconds and the 4 seconds after them." Socrates, who was put to death in Athens in 399 BC for the crime of making powerful men uncomfortable with questions about what they actually knew, argued that wisdom begins not with the accumulation of knowledge but with the accurate measurement of its boundaries. He said that the man who does not know what he does not know is in a condition worse than ignorance. He is in a condition that actively prevents correction. The thing that cannot be corrected cannot improve. The thing that cannot improve remains what it is, permanently mistaking its own ceiling for the sky. Seagal's art was real. The witnesses in Burbank were not watching a fraud. They were watching something genuine and extraordinary meet something genuine and more extraordinary. In a room with bad lighting and a buzzing fluorescent hum, on a Tuesday afternoon when none of the 11 people present had arrived expecting to witness anything in particular. The lesson of that afternoon has nothing to do with Aikido. It has nothing to do with Chuck Norris. It has to do with the specific danger of a credential that becomes a conclusion. With what happens to a man's ability to learn when the proof of his learning is used as evidence that learning is complete. The 7th degree is real. The skill it represents is real. The error is the conversion of a rank into a ceiling, and the naming of that ceiling sky. There is a sentence that travels through every serious martial art, usually attributed to no one in particular, and therefore owned by everyone who trains. It says the black belt is not the destination. It is the door through which the real study begins. It says this because everyone who has spent enough years training knows that every new level of competence opens a view onto a larger landscape of incompetence. The further you go, the more clearly you can see how far there is still to travel. The man who mistakes arrival for completion has not found the end of the road. He has simply stopped walking. Chuck Norris walked home to Northridge. He drove. But he walked the way men walk who have not decided they have arrived anywhere permanent. Next week we will turn our attention to what happened in a hotel ballroom in Dallas in 1974, when a 23-year-old with a tournament record that had never included a single loss walked into a room where a man was sitting alone at a table, reading, in street clothes with his back to the door. The younger man said 4 words. The older man finished his paragraph before he looked up. What happened in the next 90 seconds rewrote what both men believed was possible, and one of the witnesses carried the story to a journalist 20 years later, in a deposition about something else entirely, and the journalist recognized what he was holding and knew enough to write it down. That story belongs to next week. This one belongs to Burbank, and to 11 people in a room with bad lighting, and to a man who said 7 words at a volume designed not to carry, and then drove himself home and said nothing more about it to anyone. The story a man tells about his own ability and the story that ability tells when it meets the world are rarely the same story. The distance between them is where character lives. Some men spend a lifetime narrowing that distance, others spend it insisting the distance does not exist. Socrates knew the difference. So did 11 people in Burbank, California on a Tuesday afternoon in November 1988. And now, if you have stayed this long, so do you.